So we left off the last episode with, I suppose, the arrival of ecstasy into Ireland, this upcoming young breed of chaotic, slightly criminal. Heroin is no longer the thing. You have ecstasy, and cocaine is coming, of course, as well. So I suppose we'll just place everybody for a minute. We have in the Netherlands Christy Kinahan's business partner, John Cunningham, and he is operating their business because Kinahan Sr. is in jail. He had returned in the late 90s to his father's funeral and had been picked up on a warrant for a jail term over forged checks.
Yeah,
and he was serving his time in prison. Daniel, his son, is visiting him regularly in Portlaoise, but Cunningham is keeping the show on the road in the Netherlands, where they're wholesaling ecstasy, tablets, guns, and anything else to get their hands on. But John Cunningham is put under a wiretap over there by the Dutch police, and he is basically he's nailed on. I mean, they catch him with his hands on the product, and he's jailed. But 1 month after he's jailed, and which is always the way with Kinahan and Cunningham, they have this little dance, merry dance. He goes into jail and Kinahan's released. So he moves straight to the UK, where he sort of sets up again, and he starts to travel in and out of the Netherlands, Spain, etc. Daniel and Christopher Jr. are at this point in the early 2000s. They have an address in England. They're kind of, they're coming in line for the succession. Kinahan wants them to take over when he's prepared to take a step back. And everybody knows this, that they're the ones that if you want success, you need to hitch your wagon to them because they have, the family business to take over. If you go back, I'll stop you there. Right.
Let's go back to where Gary Hutch is in the middle of all of this. Because, as you said, John Cunningham is arrested in Amsterdam and he's prosecuted and put behind bars for a lengthy sentence. But the consequences of his labour are happening in Ireland. And as part of that wiretap operation, the guards basically bust his operation. And when we spoke the last time, we spoke about ecstasy as sort of emerging out of nowhere. A lot of it had been done by sort of mule smugglers, basically bringing tablets in themselves. But by the time John Cunningham is in the middle of it all, it's an industrial operation. And you can see that back in Ireland. He was using a guy called Chris Casserly, who was also a really close associate of Daniel Kinahan's, or of Christy Kinahan Sr. And they were operating out of a flat in Harold's Cross. They were selling, I think they were talking about 80,000 ecstasy tablets in the space of between November 99 and February 2000.
So this is like their Irish HQ,
this is their distribution hub.
Right.
So they have guys here, and one of the guys operating at that flat is a guy called Sam O'Sullivan, who goes on a run as soon as one of their hauliers is busted, and he'd go on to feature in many Crime World episodes and stay a key part of that operation. At this stage, Gary Hutch and his teenage pals are also starting to make waves, and although they're linked in with the Kinahans, they're still at that very chaotic stage of criminality. So if you look at Ross Browning, who in future, over 2 decades later, will be described as the Kinahans' number one man in Ireland. In 2001, you can see the nucleus of that criminal organisation being set up. Ross Browning is 17. In 2001, he's convicted of an armed robbery. Basically, a Securicor van drives out of McDonald's off Parnell Street. Ross Browning holds it up with a gun and gets away with 17,000. 2 other people are prosecuted with him, Barry Finnegan and Robert Brown.
Oh my God, they keep coming back, don't they?
They keep coming back. Yeah. Barry Finnegan comes back many times, and Robert Brown will be convicted another 2 decades later.
So these would have been a crew from Hardwick Street flats, which we spoke about in the first of this series. That was really where the birthplace of the Concerned Parents Against Drugs came out of. But the kind of the next generation, the sort of the parental generation of these people would have been marching on homes trying to kick the dealers out.
And Ross Browning's father in particular was one of them.
But the younger crew, they see drugs as different. They see the cocaine and the ecstasy as something completely different. They're not peddling death.
No.
With this. This is how this sort of is seen. And I suppose you have, you're talking about Browning robbing a secure. So what's the money for? And of course, what the money is for is because, so Kinahan Senior, go back to him, he's on the move. He's traveling around Europe and particularly between Holland and Spain. He has a great big plan, and it's for Kinahan in corporate. This is going to be the biggest this is going to be the Irish mafia, really. So anybody who wants to come along on the coattails of this has to have two things. They have to have loyalty to Kinahan, and they have to have money to invest in his operation. And I suppose when you come to Gary Hutch, he's definitely ambitious. He has his uncle, the monk, whose sort of world of cunning robberies and spoil sharing with the provos is becoming a thing of the past. And despite his own shaky start in gangland, because Kinahan Senior was a bit of a cuckoo in the nest in the early days, he is looking like the one to bet on, to put your money on. He's the one that's going to go far. And the monk also sort of cared about his image, and that generation of the Hutch grouping cared about their image. But the new generation, the Gary Hutches and his likes, they don't care. They're not prudish about being linked to drugs or violent crime. They're sort of almost proud and open about their links to the drug trade.
Totally. And you have to remember the significance of Christopher Bouncer Hutch at that stage, who is older than Gary and really forges those personal ties with Daniel Kinahan first. Also, they have to raise the money, as you say. These are young guys and they deal with the Kinahans, but they have to have the money, and then they buy the drugs and they operate it kind of as their own little operation. So you can see they're constantly trying to raise those funds. And Gary Hutch probably gets his first real taste of serious trouble with the law, although we did have other issues before, when he gets involved in a robbery. What happens is he basically goes out to the home of a businessman in Malahide. He holds up him and his wife, and he gets away with 40,000 worth of jewellery and 8,000 in cash. And this, ultimately gets caught and ends up in prison. So this is the road that these guys are on. Another couple of Gary Hutch's associates, in particular a guy called Martin Servey, he's ultimately arrested actually with Gary Finnegan and in Amsterdam at some point. And they're caught. There's guns seized in the home in Servey's flat. So they're also childhood friends of Gary Hutch. Martin Servey's from East Wall originally, and they're starting to be taken into the Kinahan operation. So you have people flying over to Amsterdam, dealing with them, coming back and dealing with this grouping in the ground, often based around Hardwick Street in the North Inner City. So the nucleus of this operation is now clearly being formed.
And, while they're raising the funds, they also have to show that loyalty that we spoke of. And Kinahan Senior, who's an intriguing character in many ways, he is very cold, calculated, very intelligent, and able to create all the businesses around all this and the money laundering. But he's also somebody who doesn't seem to be too forgiving. So he always had this gripe with a chap called Raymond Salinger. He blamed him for basically this check forgery that he got jailed for in the last years of the 1990s. He never your man actually, Salinger, as far as I know, had left the country. He knew Kinahan was sort of against him. He'd left the country and had only just come back in about 2003. He was watching a Leeds-Chelsea match in a pub in Dublin when two men walked in with balaclavas and sort of calmly shot him dead. This was the ultimate sort of gangland murder and the start of what the Kinahans would, sanction many, many murders in times to come. But under those balaclavas, we now know, was Gary Hutch and another associate of his. So he is raising the funds, he's investing in the organisation, he's very ambitious and wants to be part of it, but he's also willing to show that loyalty and to carry out that crime.
Yeah, and I mean, Raymond Salinger had, as you said, he had fled and moved to the UK knowing the Kinahans were after him. There's a couple of theories about why, but one of the theories is that Kinahan had blamed Salinger for the original heroin bust that had put him behind bars back in the 1980s, and he'd held that grudge that long. Christy Kinahan has never been as trigger happy as some of the gangland figures, but he certainly is somebody who held that grudge, and he was probably the first definitive victim of the Kinahan cartel, Raymond Salinger. At this stage, Bouncer Hutch is suspected of being part of that operation, though not suspected of being the gunman. And Gary Hutch has, I suppose, when we talk about the Irish mafia, but certainly the in the US mafia, carrying out your first kill is a big moment where your loyalty is proven, and you're accepted into that. Now, following shortly after the murder of Raymond Salinger, Christopher Bouncer Hutch is found dead. He dies as a result of a cocaine overdose, and it becomes a point of public controversy, actually, because Neddy Hutch's father and his wife Jane Hutch had a very volatile relationship. That relationship had broken down, and Jane Hutch doesn't accept that Christopher Bouncer Hutch has died of a drugs overdose, and she believes he's been murdered. Now, Neddy Hutch and his wife, who subsequently passed away, they are a very important point of contact with the Kinahans, because while Gerard Hutch wasn't a personal friend of Christy Kinahan or anything like it, Neddy Hutch was a different matter. They had known each other. They had palled around with each other. They had been friends even back to the 80s, 90s. They certainly, their kids had contact with each other through that friendship.
Well, actually, Neddy Hutch was really the first point of contact to criminality for Christy Kinahan Senior, because of course he grew up in a very middle class home in the north side of Dublin, Drumcondra.
Yeah.
Drumcondra?
No, he grew up in kind of Phibsborough. Yeah, or Cabra.
Those mix up. But yeah, he did, and it was a very middle class home, and there wasn't a kind of natural route for him into criminality, but he was this posh boy.
Yeah.
And actually, Neddy Hutch would have been synonymous with sort of robberies from the docks and having to, sell off whatever had been taken off the lorries, be it mattresses, be it whatever. And Christy Kinahan Senior was useful to him because he had sort of, posh manners, and he would be able to go in and
smooth talking.
Basically, operate as almost a fence, as an in-between, as somebody who would get rid of these stolen goods. And he obviously had that, clever mind as well, and how best to get as much money as possible from these stolen goods. So that is interesting. You can see all the connections. It's like a web, isn't it? I suppose in wider society, what you had there as well, you can't mention the early 2000s and what's happening without talking about the Celtic Tiger economy and the cocaine boom that happened alongside it. Because that was, when the cocaine use, when we had construction workers with so much money in their pockets, they didn't know what to do with it. They were going out and not just picking on construction workers. Lots of people all of a sudden had a load of disposable income, and they were going out to enjoy themselves, and they were buying cocaine, and they were buying it, and they were fueling this huge big market, really. There was a massive demand, and then these people were filling the supply.
Totally. And if you look back at some of the cocaine seizures, which we did recently, you look back in the 90s, they're really, really small and very small amounts of deaths associated with cocaine. But by the early 2000s, that had changed. There was huge money in the pumping through the economy. And that's also part of the Hutch story, because while Gerard Hutch wasn't being linked to armed robberies at that point, he had become a very successful property developer, particularly in the North Inner City. And he bought a number of homes, some of them believed to be in Talbot Street, other parts in or around the Buckingham Street area, in particular Buckingham Village, which would also play a part in the story in the future. He's believed to have bought a number of apartments. But there was also other characters in the mix there, including Matt Kelly, a guy called Paddy Shanahan, who was ultimately be shot dead, and even Jim Mansfield Sr., who was also in the mix there. So while the country started to boom, certainly Gary Hutch's personal property portfolio was booming with it.
So he has changed career, you're telling me.
Well, he has.
Anyway, I suppose back to these young guys on the streets, and they're benefiting from this. They're ambitious. They're raising funds through armed robberies, etc. They ultimately want to get to Spain. That's their finishing school. They don't want to stay here in rainy old Dublin. There's loads of reasons why criminals love Spain, and partly it's because of the weather and the lifestyle. But the likes of Gary Hutch really wants to make his move out to the sort of the heart of the Kinahan organisation. And he does actually go, he finds a role for himself in first the Netherlands and Amsterdam as a sort of logistics man. Daniel Kinahan gets him the job as such. If this was a structured business, that's what you'd be talking about. He'd know the boss's son, was friendly with the boss's son, and knew how to build that relationship. John Cunningham is beginning to move. He's becoming less sort of popular, because while he was a brilliant business partner of Christy Kinahan Sr., he didn't like all these rough Dubliners that were coming out under the sons, under Daniel and Christopher Jr. They're friends from Hardwick Street flats, they're friends from Oliver Bond, they're friends from the North Inner City, who are all landing key roles in this drug operation. Cunningham did try to speak to Kinahan about it, but Kinahan wouldn't hear of it. I mean, this is the way it was going to go. So Hutch moves out. He's in Amsterdam, certainly by 2005, because we know that at this point he's joined there by Fat Freddie Thompson from Crumlin, who is in the midst of a very violent gang war with his rival Brian Rattigan, which has resulted in a lot of murders. Thompson has blooded Paddy Doyle from the North Inner City, who is working essentially as his personal hitman, and has conducted a lot of murders. The heat is on him. So Thompson, Hutch and Doyle sort of gather in Amsterdam, and that's where they base themselves to get away from the heat from Ireland. But also they're key to meeting and organising the logistics of the Kinahan drugs coming into Europe.
Yeah, so there's a few things going on. There's a general move to the south of Spain from criminal organisations anyway, sometime in the 2000s. The ports in the Netherlands will remain hugely important because much of the cocaine came in there. But the Kinahans are also simultaneously, they're involved in bringing huge amounts of cannabis from Morocco directly to the coast of Spain. And we see some of their key associates ultimately get prosecuted in Spain for in connection with those shipments, including Bernard Clancy, including Sam O'Sullivan, who both serve prison sentences in the early 2000s to do with those. So they have to have a presence in both areas.
Yeah.
The cocaine has to come into Holland and it has to be moved, but they also have to be in Spain. And we sometimes forget, of course, that even John Cunningham, when we talked about that ecstasy, I think it was said he brought in 2,400 kilos of cannabis into Ireland in that time as well. So the cannabis business is still, if not the biggest money spinner at this point, it is a hugely important money spinner. A very, very big business. So they're basically having two wings of the company. And Christy Kinahan is overseeing it, moving between all of those areas. He brings people over from Ireland as well. He's meeting them in Amsterdam. And he, as you said, while he has a few people that he does like he did like Martin Servey by all accounts, he does like Sam O'Sullivan. He's not so fond of people like Gary Hutch.
No.
Who he doesn't find them to be as serious and as reliable.
Well, I suppose the lifestyle, there's a lot of cocaine going on with them. There's a lot of women. There's a lot of, they're loud and noisy. And
yes,
he doesn't see them as having the sort of middle class manners that he has and the sophistication.
Exactly. And there's other interesting things, I suppose, going on. You're talking about Fat Freddie Thompson, and there's a lot of pressure in Ireland. There's a lot of murders going on. There's a lot of risk. So they start moving out of the country. And both Paddy Doyle leaves Ireland ultimately because it's believed he feared he was going to be charged with murders. There's also that intriguing link about people moving to Birmingham and the Bomber Kavanagh organisation there, and the fact that the Kinahans, always had that connection as well. So Paddy Doyle in particular lands in Spain.
Funny, it's like they kind of, Spain is their base and their playground. Amsterdam is where they do the business.
Yeah.
Whereas, and they've properties in both places, and they're moving constantly between them. And I suppose, when you live in Europe is it's vast, but it is sort of easier to move around.
Yes,
between the transport networks, but they're up and down. But Spain is party, and they're young, and they've money to flash, and they're able to rent or buy these fabulous villas with swimming pools. They're able to do what they want. Now, Daniel Kinahan is at this point very much the successor of his father. He's in waiting for the throne, really. And he has this, he wants to demand respect, shall I say, rather than command it. And most people are reverent to him because they know where their bread is buttered. But Paddy Doyle is a bit of a wild card, and he's not at all. He's out there, and instead of really knocking around with Kinahan and licking ass with him, he's knocking around a lot with another character from the North Inner City, Peter Fatso Mitchell, once part of the Gilligan gang, and now actually out in the Costa doing really good business, and the owner of a bar called Paparazzi, where it's a mix of business and pleasure, isn't it, Paparazzi? But Paddy Doyle is knocking around with him. Freddie Thompson feels more comfortable in that company, as does Gary Hutch. But Paddy Doyle is not respectful enough to Kinahan, and Daniel Kinahan wants rid of him.
Yeah, so Paddy Doyle, probably the most feared man in Dublin in his lifetime. He had, as I said, he'd been in a relationship with a cousin of Fat Freddie's for a long time, so they had that connection there anyway. Paddy Doyle had been suspected of a number of murders as part of the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud, and in one occasion is believed to have shot Brian Radigan actually with a shotgun. So, but yes, the Mitchell, Fatso Mitchell from the North Inner City as well. Paddy Doyle from Portland Row, another childhood friend of Gary Hutch and Mago Gately, and he wasn't somebody to be trifled with. Let's put it that way. Kinahan didn't like him. He seems to have a tendency to surround himself with people that are this kind of unquestioning loyalty.
He's Trump-esque.
He likes his compliments. And there's people like Bernard Clancy that we spoke about from Oliver Bond. I mean, he's always said to be this incredibly loyal sort of person. But Paddy Doyle is a person to be reckoned with. So he's drifted over there, and he seems to, it is said, and that he's kept contact as well as the North Inner City crew with also some guys from Liverpool. He seems to have those connections that are to a degree independent of the Kinahans, and it doesn't seem to go down well. He's also very close to Ger Dundon, spends a lot of time over there living next to Paddy Doyle as well. So he's in a way forging his own little clique, and that doesn't go down well.
So on February the 4th, 2008, Doyle, Hutch and Thompson are sitting in a jeep in Cancelada, which is near where Doyle is actually living. There had been a situation earlier in the morning that the electricity had suddenly gone off in his property, and he had phoned Hutch and told him, come and get me, we need to go to the gym. He doesn't seem to be a patient type. So they were about to pull off when this BMW pulls up, and the passenger starts firing shots at Doyle through the window of the car in an attempt to escape. Hutch slams the car into a lamppost, and he and Thompson run for their lives. Doyle is left there dead in the car. Now, what's happened here? It takes some time to work it out, but
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly it's put out by the Kinahans and probably put out through whatever contacts there are in the police that this is a hit carried out probably by Russian gangsters who are in dispute over a drug debt. Now, that fiction is really heavily maintained. It is said that the Kinahans will continue to push that line, and on one occasion, there's a report that an associate of Gary Hutch is mouthing off in a pub back in Dublin, saying Paddy Doyle had to go, and he's actually beaten up by members of the Kinahan faction who don't even want him to say that publicly amongst themselves.
Because Gary Hutch, of course, returns to carry his coffin.
Gary Hutch returns to carry his coffin. Paddy Doyle, while a very feared character, is also a very popular character as well. He has very close contacts. I mean, Eamon de Dunn, for example, would have been a very close friend, and he even bought his own grave next to Paddy Doyle, ultimately. So he has that kind of loyalty towards him. But the fullness of time, it does become clear who carried out the murder, and it is a Kinahan internal housekeeping, let's put it that way. And
Hutch and Thompson are complicit.
Hutch and Thompson are complicit, it is suspected they knew exactly what was happening. And of course, the gunman is identified through intelligence as being Eric Lucky Wilson. Eric Lucky Wilson is a hitman for hire who at that stage is also living in Spain, originally from the Ballyfermot area, linked to a huge number of murders, both in Ireland and in Spain.
Freelance, essentially, hitman.
A freelance hitman, not a Kinahan hitman, not a Kinahan associate, but somebody who can be hired and will shoot whoever, and has carried out hits for people like Mick Kelly. Has also worked with a guy called Sean Hunt in Ballyfermot. But, that rarity, a genuine gun for hire. And that's eventually the Spanish police, despite the campaign of misinformation, which is also a feature of a Daniel Kinahan operation as well. That
the double cross,
followed by the campaign of misinformation. But eventually, the Spanish police come to realise and have identified Eric Lucky Wilson, who is somebody that is causing a degree of chaos in Spain anyway.
And let's linger there for a second on Gary Hutch. He's in his 20s. He's doing well. He's really at the, he's getting up there, the ranks of that Kinahan organisation. He is really pals with Daniel Kinahan at this stage, and they'll go on to get even closer. But he's shown loyalty to the Kinahan organisation. He has taken out Raymond Salinger, a guy in a pub in Dublin. He has then gone on to double-cross his own childhood pal. And that double-cross really shows the nature of him at this stage. Whatever he once was like, he has lost any sort of empathy, because he's not only double-crossing his friend, but he's double-crossing the parents of the friend and his community, because he comes back to Dublin to mourn with the rest of them, having been complicit in Paddy Doyle's murder.
And I suppose underneath all of that is the realisation, even from somebody like Gary Hutch with his connections, that, if you don't do what you're told, your own life is in danger as well.
And nothing is going to stand in the way of his ambition.
Nothing is going to stand in the way of his ambition.
Now, let me tell you what happens about 2 months after Paddy Doyle is killed. Back to his friend Peter Fatso Mitchell, who's out there doing well. He's running this paparazzi bar, and there is some attention on that, some media attention on that. And within weeks, it's raided. At the same time, Christy Kinahan Sr. is returned to Belgium over this very serious money laundering and corruption conviction he has up there. I mean, corrupting the police at top level in Belgium and money laundering money through a very interesting building in Antwerp he had bought. And so he has had to go back for that. He's fought this, but he has to go back to jail, which he does not like. So it's August 2008. And it's about 3 months after Kinahan Sr. has been nabbed. He always blames somebody on his own downfall. Every time he goes into prison, somebody has to suffer. Fatso's doing well. He is running independently from the Kinahans, who are absolutely hell-bent on becoming the Irish mafia on the Costa del Sol, and nobody is going to stand in their way. So Fatso's sipping a drink at the El Jardín bar, which is a stone's throw from his own premises, Paparazzi. And this hitman in a balaclava runs at him with a gun. Now, Fatso was actually, believe it or not, at the peak of his fitness at this time, even despite his name.
Yeah.
And he was fairly deft at moving. He dived for cover, and in the panic that ensued, the gunman slipped and kind of fell, and he managed to just shoot at the at his shoulder and leg. Fatso's brought to hospital, where he considers his options. His bar has been raided and closed. His girlfriend at the time, I think, is fed up of him and the lifestyle they're living. She's also terrified of what threat they may be under. And, Fatso decides to pack up and leave the Costa. And I have a theory about all that. And I do think that is jealousy a little bit from Daniel Kinahan. It's that sort of cunning way he can turn people on one another. He can create a narrative. Whatever was said about Fatso and Paddy Doyle at this time, we don't know. But something was said enough about them to turn their own friends and their childhood friends against them.
Yeah, and I think as well, Fatso Mitchell, certainly at that point, has got very significant contacts in the criminal underworld in the UK, and that's primarily who he's dealing with. And, he's buying drugs en masse with these guys in a kind of, getting discounts by buying en masse. So Daniel Kinahan certainly at this point, and that would become apparent through his dealings with Bomber Kavanagh over the years. He's really eyeing up that UK market as something that he wants to get into, and he probably sees Mitchell as a rival. Mitchell then ultimately gets out of Dodge because whatever
survival instinct.
Survival instinct. The way the wind is blowing, it's become really clear. The Kinahans have gone from sometime in the 2000s to being amongst the big drug dealers into Ireland, now are edging up into a whole other level. And he simply isn't able to compete. He, funnily enough, ends up in Amsterdam again.
Yeah.
Where he hooks up with John Traynor, the coach.
Again, another member of the John Gilligan's former gang.
Exactly. And they continued to deal with criminals in the UK, but his peak has passed and it never returns.
So we're at the end of 2008, and I suppose you have the Kinahans are actually, they opened their own bar at this stage. The way Mitchell had Paparazzi sort of suited them. You could do business in it. People could come in. And so they open a bar called the Owl Dubliner. Christy Kinahan Sr. is in jail in Belgium, and Daniel Kinahan has the reins while his dad is locked up. And his wingman is Gary Hutch. So it's the two of them. And they are really getting the first taste of power and the throne. They have plans. They need money. Which brings us to something that Gary Hutch gets involved in 2009. And that is it's going to be something that he sees as a big money spinner for him. February 2009, the Bank of Ireland.
Yeah, so I still think it is the biggest bank raid in Irish history.
In the Republic.
In the Republic,
yeah.
Exactly.
We won't, nobody will ever beat that Northern bank robbery.
No, but it's 7.8 million, and it's probably the last really, really major bank heist, is it?
Yes.
I can't think of one subsequently that came close. It is a type of tiger kidnapping. A bank worker, his girlfriend and his mother are confronted at their home at gunpoint. The girlfriend and the mother are held, and the bank worker is told, go and get money out of the vault if they want to live. Basically, they're under extreme threat. He ultimately goes back to the vault, collects the money and hands it over at Clontarf Dart Station. And they get cleared away with 7.8. 7.8, I think.
Okay.
Now, instantly, the guards are alerted, obviously, as soon as it's safe.
Yeah.
And I think they had already had some sort of, they'd heard whispers that something like this had happened again, not harking back to the previous bank raids again. So what happens is they instantly crack down. There's huge amounts of raids. It becomes a major political scandal because of the scale of it. And a number of people are arrested. They manage to find some of the money, because the money is obviously broken up. Some guy has, I think, 100 grand taped to his leg, and there's others recovered at another address. There's some more money recovered at an address in the Phibsborough area. Ultimately, they get back about 1.8 million. So 6 million of it is never recovered. And it becomes clear who's involved. 7 people are arrested, and they're all really associates of Gary Hutch. Gary Hutch's name is being mentioned in all of the reports.
But it's a cunning plan.
It's a cunning plan, and therefore it gets presumed that Gerard Hutch is.
Well, his mind maybe was.
Yeah, but that's what's
suspected.
said. However, he's never arrested, and there's never anything really concrete to link him to that. Gary Hutch is arrested now. Subsequently, what his role in it is actually a matter of dispute. I have talked to people who said he wasn't involved in the actual operation, but he was there to deal with the money. But other people who are very close to him and his childhood friends are implicated directly.
I suppose what will become clear is that the money they got away with, that Gary Hutch invests it in Kinahan Inc. and becomes essentially, him and his associates become shareholders of the Kinahan Network organisation.
Yeah.
If this was legitimate business, they would be expecting to...
they're basically exercising their share options.
Yeah,
exactly. If you want to look at it that way.
Well, that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
And that is 2009, and we're heading into 2010, when the Kinahans are going to make world, global headlines. Because in 2010, in May of that year, Europol coordinate a massive offensive against the Kinahan operation, who they call the Irish Mafia on the Costa del Sol. First time we've had an actual mafia described. So all the while that they're growing and they're doing all this, the Spanish police have had the Kinahans under surveillance.
Yeah, under a wiretap. So many of their phone conversations are recorded. They're monitored travelling around the globe, in particular going at times to Brazil, where they seem to have invested in property. Christy Kinahans also travelling to parts of Asia. So they seem to have this very good picture of the whole operation. And they bust into the homes. You get these brilliant images of all of the main figures in the Kinahans, including John Cunningham, Daniel Christie Jr. and Christie Sr. being hauled out of their houses. They put out pictures of Lamborghinis. I think they seized 20 luxury cars. And, it looks like this could be the end.
Well, it's described as the takedown. And of course, under Spanish law, they're all placed in custody while the magistrate continues to investigate what the police have given her over these couple of years of surveillance. Interestingly, and Gary Hutch slightly slips the net. He isn't arrested for a good while because he's in hiding in Amsterdam, along with Freddie Thompson. So as part, I suppose, of their report to the courts, the Spanish police define what the Kinahan organisation is at that stage. It's a detailed pyramid structure that they present to the court. And right at the pinnacle of it is Christy Kinahan Sr. To his right, they put John Cunningham at this point in charge of trafficking activities. And to his left, a guy called Camus, who's a senior money launderer. And directly underneath the three of them, they have Kinahan's sons. Daniel is in control of trafficking. And what always made me sort of grin was harsh decisions, as they call it. That would be murder. While Christy Jr. is underneath this Camus guy, and he's managing business and investments for the organisation. So you can see how Kinahan Sr. is grooming the two boys, and he's seen their strengths and their weaknesses maybe. Daniel Kinahan's gone on to the side of the drug trafficking and the harsh decisions, and Junior is gone to the sort of the more business end of things. But the report highlights other people in the structure, and it also places Gary Hutch and Freddie Thompson directly under Daniel Kinahan.
Yes.
So they're not far from the top at this point.
And ultimately, in a separate case, Freddie Thompson will be extradited to Ireland, I think a year later, for an assault on a pub, a relatively minor crime in the scheme of things. But at that point, the Spanish police also described them as being directly answering to Daniel Kinahan. And he describes both Gary Hutch as, he says Thompson and Hutch had lived together as well, which was also true. They're described as driving for Daniel Kinahan and Christy Kinahan, described as bodyguards, and they also say that they both are involved directly in the purchase of drugs, in particular at times going to Morocco or going to other countries to do that final
do the business,
deal.
the deal, yeah. So the management of the drugs, trafficking, the transport and security.
Yes.
Essentially. Yeah, so, it looked like it was all over, didn't it? But of course it wasn't, because between then, 2010, the end of 2010 and really 2014, the Kinahans get back to business. The Spanish system, legal system, doesn't seem to suit the takedown of a mafia organisation, in that they all get bail. After about 6 months in custody, if even that long, they get bail. They get out. Daniel Kinahan, his father, and John Cunningham tell everyone, we're going to beat this. We're going to beat this rap. There's nothing to worry about. Gary returns to Spain, where he actually moves in with Daniel. And the friends sort of start joking about the two of them, that they're so close at this stage that it's like a bromance. I mean, they're living in a fabulous villa. They have a chef working for them. They party hard. They go out together. They stay in together and watch movies in their pajamas. They're really good friends. And this period is the golden era of the Kinahans on the Costa for a number of reasons. Not least that they promised everybody they'd beat the rap, and they do.
Yeah.
Which empowers them.
Yeah.
They're bigger than the system. They're bigger than the legal system. No police organisation in Spain can take them down. But also, really, because this is when they're living it up.
Yeah.
But, and I think I was out in Spain, I think it was 2013, and at that point, we'd heard the Kinahans were very much back in business, and we kind of went out to discover that they had ownership over Puerto Banús. Puerto Banús is a really sort of posh holiday destination on the Costa, where normal tourists, by the way, and golfers and everybody else mingle, but they don't realise at that point and that they're mingling with some of the most, high-powered members of the criminal fraternity in Europe. But the Kinahans were very much based in Puerto Banús. They had opened a gym there called MGM, which goes on in the Kinahan story. But they, owned and had control of bars, restaurants, nightclubs. They had fabulous properties. I mean, we went to see Christy Kinahan Sr.'s property, which was in this gated, fabulously exclusive development called Torre Bermaja. I've never been in an apartment like those. We went to see a neighbouring apartment, which was up for sale, so as we could get an idea of what the opulence was. Gary and Daniel were living in a place called, I think it was Costa Golf, or one of these, again, very private developments. Daniel had a number of properties, and I think they seem to have moved about them, but they were always living together. It's all looking really, really fantastic, but I think it's safe to say that scratch the surface and things are starting to fall apart.
Certainly, but I think what has happened at that stage is we always called them the Kinahan cartel, but there is a bit of cartel economics going on at that point, and this is what I was told by a senior source, let's put it that way. He said that Christy Kinahan and Daniel Kinahan had done a deal with the cartels in Colombia, that they would, or some of those cartels, and I know there's many of them, that they would only sell to the Kinahans in Europe, and that they trusted the Kinahans because they always paid their debts to the cartels, and they were very reliable, where other people would lose money or somebody gets shot or whatever, and the debts wouldn't happen. So they have they start becoming huge players in the European market in a way. Obviously, they had the Irish and the maybe parts of the UK market sewn up, but they start becoming kind of the purchasers of the cocaine for these other criminal gangs, who then start effectively they become wholesaling to them, and they become the most significant organised crime presence in that part of Spain, which is still called the Costa del Crime for a reason, because all of the criminal gangs from all over Europe and across the world are there. But the Kinahans are, and even you can see it in the Spanish press, they're regarded as being the primary presence and really the controlling factor. So the money starts to escalate, and they get bigger and bigger. And also at that time, the Bomber Kavanagh organisation, which is one of the primary drug distribution organisations in the UK, they start getting brought into the fold in a much more structured way, don't they?
Mm-hmm. They do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's boom times, and we're going to move on to the third part where we will really explain what's going on in the background. But I suppose safe to say for the moment that keep in mind that share option that Gary Hutch, we believe, took in the Kinahans. And, as these years are going and he's seeing the kind of money that's coming in, where's his return?
And that is always, for any of these criminal organisations, the seeds of their defeat are always sown by that jealousy as the huge money comes in. Why isn't it being trickled down?
Exactly. Right, well, we'll come back for part 3. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.